You know that neighbor who talks too loud on their phone in public and you can hear their entire conversation whether you want to or not? Yeah, imagine that, except it's his literal job, and he's announcing your personal business, and there's no escaping it because he's standing in the middle of the town square with a bell ringing loud enough to wake the dead. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1750. You're walking through town, trying to mind your own business, when you hear it. Oyez, 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 which is Old English for shut up and listen to me. A man in an elaborate coat, probably ridiculous looking even by 1750 standards, is standing on the steps of the town hall ringing a handbell. Everyone stops, because they have to, because whatever he's about to announce might be important, might affect your life directly, might be about you. He clears his throat dramatically, and then he shouts, "Be it known that John Miller, baker, has been found in violation of the bread assize, selling loaves under the regulated weight. He is fined 2 shillings and warned against future deception." John Miller, the baker, is standing right there in the crowd. Everyone turns to look at him. He's humiliated. His business is ruined. His reputation is destroyed. All because this guy with a bell just announced his crime to literally everyone in town. That's the town crier, the human loudspeaker, the original mass media, the man whose entire job was to stand in public spaces and shout information at people who had no choice but to listen. He didn't just announce laws and regulations. He announced deaths, births, marriages, crimes, public shamings, lost items, upcoming events, weather warnings, military news, and occasionally someone's personal drama if they paid him enough. This isn't a story about a quaint old profession that faded away naturally. This is a story about what happens when one person controls the flow of information to an entire community. When news isn't something you seek out, it's something that finds you whether you like it or not. When your private business becomes public announcement. But here's what nobody tells you about town criers. They didn't just deliver news. They controlled it, shaped it, decided what mattered and what didn't, and the power that gave them was terrifying. This is where things take a turn.
Here's what you need to understand. Before town criers, information moved slowly and unevenly. You'd think people would just talk to each other, right? Spread news organically through conversation. But illiteracy rates were massive. In medieval and early modern Europe, maybe 10–20% of people could read. In rural areas, even less. The printing press existed by the 1400s, but printed materials were expensive and useless if you couldn't read them. So how did ordinary people find out about new laws, tax changes, military drafts, public health warnings, executions scheduled for tomorrow that they definitely wanted to attend because public executions were apparently entertainment? Someone had to tell them, out loud, in person. Enter the town crier, a position that dates back to medieval times and possibly earlier. The role was official, appointed by local government or nobility. The crier was given authority to make public announcements on behalf of whoever held power. In England, town criers were royal appointments. They spoke with the authority of the crown. Interrupting a town crier or assaulting one wasn't just rude, it was treason. You could be executed for it. Think about what that means. This one guy, standing in the town square, had the legal backing of the monarchy. His words weren't just his words, they were the king's words. Disagreeing with him meant disagreeing with royal authority. The town crier's day would typically start early. He'd received his proclamations from local officials, written announcements he might not even be able to read himself, depending on the era and location. If he couldn't read, someone would read them to him and he'd memorize them. Then he'd go to designated spots around town, the market square, the church steps, major intersections, anywhere people gathered, and he'd ring his bell. That bell was crucial. The sound carried far, signaling that an announcement was coming. People would stop working, stop talking, and listen. Oyeys, 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 he'd shout. 3 times, always 3 times. Then the announcement. Sometimes it was practical. All able-bodied men between 16 and 40 are required to muster for militia training this Saturday at dawn. Sometimes it was legal. Let it be known that the punishment for poaching the king's deer is death by hanging.
Sometimes it was commercial. The merchant ship Mary Elizabeth has arrived in port with goods from the Indies. Trading begins at noon. Sometimes it was personal. Missing 1 gray mare, white star on forehead. Reward of 5 shillings for information leading to recovery. And sometimes it was brutal. Thomas Whitfield has been found guilty of theft and will be hanged in the market square tomorrow at noon. All citizens are invited to attend. The town crier was news anchor, radio, newspaper, public bulletin board, and social media, all rolled into one loud man with a bell. But here's something that'll mess with you. The town crier didn't just announce information. He interpreted it, emphasized certain parts, downplayed others. His tone, his delivery, his facial expressions all shaped how people received the news. If he announced a new tax with enthusiasm, people might accept it more easily. If he announced it with barely concealed disgust, they'd be more likely to resist. He had more power than anyone acknowledged, and most people never questioned it because his authority came from above, from nobility, from government, from institutions too powerful to challenge.
Let's talk about what town criers actually announced for a minute, because it wasn't all ship arrivals and weather warnings. A lot of what town criers shouted into the streets was designed to humiliate, control, and punish. Public shamings were huge. If you committed a crime, especially a moral crime like adultery, drunkenness, being a scold, which meant being a woman who talked too much or argued with her husband, the punishment often included public announcement. The town crier would shout your name, your crime, your punishment. Everyone would know. Your neighbors, your employer, your children's friends' parents. There was no privacy, no second chances, no living it down. Sarah Mitchell has been found guilty of scolding and disturbing the peace. She is sentenced to the ducking stool and will be publicly dunked in the river this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Sarah Mitchell now has to endure not just the physical punishment, but the social death. Everyone knows. Everyone will come watch. Everyone will gossip about it for months. The town crier made you infamous, and there was nothing you could do about it. Some criers took obvious pleasure in the dramatic announcements. They'd add flourishes, embellishments, theatrical pauses. They were performers as much as officials, and your humiliation was their stage. Public executions were announced with particular detail, not just who was being executed and why, but when and where, and sometimes graphic descriptions of the method. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, all announced casually like they were advertising a market fair. William Clark, found guilty of murder, will be hanged by the neck until dead in the market square this Friday at noon. His body will remain displayed until sunset as a warning to others. People would mark their calendars. Families would attend. Children would be brought to witness as a moral lesson. The town crier's announcement turned death into spectacle. And then there were the personal announcements. Lost and found items, sure, but also Margaret Thompson's husband seeks information about her whereabouts as she has absconded from the marital home.
Your marital problems, announced to everyone. Notice, Richard Brown owes substantial debts to multiple creditors and is not to be extended further credit. Your financial troubles, announced to everyone. Warning, Elizabeth Moore is suspected of harboring royalist sympathies, and citizens are advised to report any suspicious activity. Your political beliefs, announced to everyone, in an era when political differences could get you killed. The town crier didn't just deliver news, he delivered judgment.
And once he'd shouted your business into the street, there was no taking it back, no correcting it, no escape from it. This is where the psychology gets really dark. Because here's the thing about public announcement culture. It kept people in line through fear. Not just fear of punishment, but fear of exposure. Fear that your mistakes, your secrets, your private struggles would become public knowledge. You'd think twice before cheating on your spouse, not just because adultery was illegal, but because you knew if you got caught, the town crier would make sure everyone knew. You'd think twice before speaking against the government, not just because it was dangerous, but because your name would be shouted in the streets, and your neighbors would know you were a troublemaker. You'd think twice before anything that might draw attention, because attention meant the town crier, and the town crier meant everyone knowing your business. The system created a surveillance culture where everyone watched everyone else, knowing that any transgression might become tomorrow's public announcement. And maybe that's the real horror here. Not that the town crier existed, but that he made privacy impossible, made anonymity impossible, made the possibility of starting over, of leaving your mistakes behind, impossible. Once the town crier announced it, it was permanent truth. Now, here's something that might surprise you.
The town crier didn't die quickly. The profession lingered for centuries, adapting, shrinking, eventually becoming mostly ceremonial. Newspapers started appearing in the 1600s, but they were expensive and still required literacy. For a long time, newspapers and town criers coexisted. The crier would even announce newspaper headlines for people who couldn't read or afford to buy a copy. But by the 1800s, literacy rates were climbing. Newspapers were getting cheaper. More people could access written news directly without needing someone to shout it at them. Then came the telegraph in the 1840s, making news transmission faster. Then radio in the early 1900s, bringing voices directly into people's homes. Why go stand in the town square to hear the crier when you could read the newspaper at breakfast or listen to the radio in your parlor? The profession didn't disappear all at once. Town criers continued in some places through the 1800s, but their role became increasingly decorative. They'd announce ceremonial events, royal proclamations, local festivals. The serious news had moved elsewhere. By the mid-1900s, town criers in most places were historical reenactors, not actual information sources. Today, they exist purely for tourism and tradition, wearing historical costumes and ringing bells at heritage sites. The last working town crier in America probably disappeared sometime in the early 1900s. The last in England held on a bit longer, but by the 1970s, even traditional British towns had mostly abandoned the practice. We got what we wanted: private access to information, the ability to seek out news on our own terms, freedom from having our business shouted into the streets, control over what we knew and when we knew it. But we also lost something. We lost the shared information moment. When the town crier announced something, everyone heard it at the same time. You all had the same information, the same context. You could discuss it immediately because you'd all just experienced the same announcement. Now, everyone gets their news from different sources, different times, different algorithms. You might read something completely different from what your neighbor reads, even about the same event. There's no shared truth anymore, no common narrative. We lost accountability for information. The town crier was appointed by authorities. He had legal backing. What he announced was official. You might not like it, but you knew it came from a legitimate source. Now, anyone can announce anything on social media, and it spreads just as fast as official news, faster sometimes, and there's no way to verify what's real and what's bullshit until it's already everywhere. We lost the community gathering aspect. When the crier's bell rang, people stopped and came together, rich and poor, young and old, all standing in the same space, hearing the same information. It was one of the few truly communal experiences. Now you consume news alone, on your phone, in your car, at your desk. There's no gathering, no shared reaction, no collective processing of information. We lost public accountability for private behavior. The town crier made your mistakes public, which was cruel and invasive, but it also meant the community knew and could respond. If someone was abusing their family, defrauding customers, causing problems, everyone knew and could intervene. Now you can behave terribly in private, and as long as it doesn't go viral on social media, nobody knows and nobody helps. The town crier system had too much public exposure. Modern information systems have too much isolation. And here's the paradox. We have more information available than ever before. You can access news from anywhere in the world instantly. But we feel less informed, less certain, less connected to shared truth than people who got their news from one guy with a bell. Because information abundance doesn't create understanding. It creates confusion. When everyone's shouting their version of events, it's noise, not news. The town crier stood in one spot and everyone came to him. He said it once and everyone heard the same thing. It was simple, clear, unified. Now we're all scattered across different platforms, different feeds, different bubbles. We're all hearing different versions of reality, and we can't figure out why we can't agree on basic facts anymore. I'm not saying we should go back. The town crier's power to humiliate, to control information, to eliminate privacy, all genuinely terrible. But maybe we should remember what we traded. We traded shared truth for personalized feeds. We traded public accountability for private consumption. We traded community gathering for isolated scrolling. We traded one authoritative voice for millions of competing voices, none of them authoritative. The next time you're arguing with someone about what's happening in the world and you realize you're getting completely different information from completely different sources and there's no way to resolve who's right, the next time you're doom scrolling through contradictory headlines trying to figure out what's actually true, the next time you feel like nobody agrees on basic facts anymore and everything is chaos, remember, there used to be a guy with a bell who'd shout the news in the town square. Everyone heard the same thing at the same time. You all had the same information to work with. It was invasive, controlling, often cruel, but at least everyone knew what was happening. Now we're drowning in information and starving for truth. That's not just history. That's the sound of a bell nobody rings anymore.